What's up, Angus, man? Welcome to Dad Edge, my friend.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Great to be here, Larry.
It's good to see you. You know what's really funny is that I was creating the Dropbox folder for the show. Every asset that the video, the audio, my side of this, your side of this, the photos,
Mhm.
everything goes into a Dropbox folder for my production team. And I went in there and I was typing out your name and just from I guess habit, Angus Young. I just And I'm sitting there, I'm like, wait a second. I'm not interviewing the lead guitarist of AC/DC. Although you
But what if
guys,
you were? Sorry to let you
my
down.
God,
What
right?
if you were?
What if I was really? Yeah, here's what I'd ask him. This is one thing I've just always been so curious about. And this is my 18-year-old who is a huge AC/DC fan and he can play guitar and all this other stuff. And he loves Angus Young. And so we did, we kind of like did a lot of research on Angus. And one thing I noticed is he's a non-drinker. He doesn't drink alcohol.
Mm.
I don't think he ever has actually. And so I'd be really curious in an industry that really is so profound with alcohol and drugs and everything else. Like, how has he kept that away? Like, and why?
Hmm.
I'd really want to know the answer to
Yeah,
that. I don't know the answer to that.
that'd be amazing. And I know a lot of, having lived in Nashville, I know a lot of musicians that actually made that decision because
Yeah.
it messed them up, either in their life, their marriage, or just their choices. They wanted to be around for a long time, and the longevity of, artists that went before them that messed up with drugs and alcohol and all the rock and roll. They chose, hey, I'd like the rock and roll. I could do without the rest, and I can do rock and roll for a lot longer.
Yeah,
Which
man.
is a
Yeah.
crazy little segue we can come to in my story of when I was doing music festivals back when, because I was around a lot of musicians. We can get back to that.
Yeah. So 2003.
Yeah,
Is that the year you're talking
2003.
about?
No, well, it's actually a little bit before that. 2003 was kind of like my comeback. I had 1997. My brother and I had moved back to Wisconsin. We had tried to start an entertainment company, and one of our investors had fallen through. So we were in Chicago at the time. Let's head up to Wisconsin, hang out with mom and dad for a little bit, and decide what our next move was. And we were sitting down in a coffee shop, and we said, what if what if we just opened up a coffee shop here and front a youth center, like a nonprofit youth center, and we'll do music and poetry and computer games and land parties, and we'll call it Rockwater. And it that's just kind of stuck. We 3 weeks later we were making plans. And now this city that I thought I'd never go back to in central Wisconsin now is starting this nonprofit organization. Flash forward, we opened up 1999 and had great success. We had over 15,000 kids come through our doors, and we did over 500 shows. And from the outside, everything looked awesome. But behind the scenes, our first music festival that we put on, we had a headliner named Train mixed in with a lot of other
Wait.
great
Train,
bands,
as in train?
as in Train, Meet
Hey, look at
Virginia,
you,
Drops of
man.
Jupiter.
Yeah.
That was back in the day. And yeah, we had thunder showers come in right before they were to take stage that day. And it stopped actually at 7 o'clock, which is when showtime was for main stage. And I needed 4,000 people to show up, and only 1,400 did. Train took the stage. They were phenomenal, but we were $72,000 in the hole. And that was me having to go through an experience of wanting to prove to everyone, my wife, the city, my board, I wanted to prove to them that I could turn the ship around. And at the time I was young, I was only 20, 29, 30 years old, and thought, I can make this happen. I didn't know how to delegate. I didn't know how to ask for help. So I did what a lot of us do as men is I just, put my head down, worked harder, 70, 80, 90-hour work weeks, and tried to gut it out. And my wife grew to despise me. Why are you working at this stupid thing that's not paying you anymore? We ended up moving into my parents' basement, just trying to make ends meet. And I was living off the tip jar just to get gas money. Um, under the pain, I turned to porn. Now the guilt and shame, I turned to alcohol. And then shortly thereafter, I was sleeping around. And in short order, I blew up my marriage. I blew up the business, and I blew up my sense of self. And that takes me to 2003, divorced on December 23rd. And then on December 25th, underneath my Christmas tree, I'm on a pool of my own tears, contemplating how I was going to take my life. And suddenly, yeah, I heard a voice. And the voice said, "We're not done here yet." And I decided to stick around and find out what that meant. Got into counseling, started learning about human behavior and psychology, started learning about all the different elements that I now use today in my coaching practice. It was all a product of my brokenness and my selfishness and my narcissism. And suddenly I'm learning about healing and grace and self-compassion and love. And it changed my life.
What do you think? So, you're in this you're in this situation of disparity, and where it makes probably total sense, to just end the pain and end your life. Was this was this a voice that you just heard in your heart, like something that was, deep within you, or did you actually, did you feel that there was another presence in that room with you?
I legit heard a voice with my ears. Like,
And what did it sound
crazy.
like? I'm curious. What did it sound like? Because now you really got my curiosity going.
Yeah. If I were to remember the voice, it wasn't something that was sarcastic or judgmental. It was a voice that was just, I don't know, in some ways, it was kind of like a ta-da, like, you're at the end. We're not done here yet. And for whatever reason, I knew in that space, and I was a person of faith. So I believed that there was something out there. I believed that there was a God. Uh, Ironically, in that particular season, I had no reason why he would give a crap about me. I had failed so miserably. My dad was a pastor, and at the time I was leading worship. And not only had I blown it on all these other areas, but I was also asked to step down. I've got so much shame, so much pain, so much, regret. And of course, coming from a faith background, I actually knew a lot about religion. I knew a lot about legalism. And I was really big in condemning myself. And it wasn't until years later that I learned about grace and that I was loved just like I was. And I didn't have to prove anything, which is where, when you and I worked together, I talked about the nothingness, nothing to gain, nothing to prove, nothing to lose. And that became my invincibility, as nobody could take it away from me anymore.
What do you think? How do you think men get into a place of despair? I mean, the statistics really don't lie. I believe it's the second leading cause of death between the ages of 28 and 52, if I'm not mistaken, is men who take their own lives.
Men are twice as likely to take their lives. It's a crazy statistic. Isolation is the biggest piece. Out of our own pride, we dare not tell anybody what we're struggling with. And I mean, that was my story, to a T. And I would say, even with a lot of my clients, is they have things that they themselves don't even want to say out loud. And they know it. They're living it. And rather than ask for help, rather than seek somebody else out, they just bury it. And they keep themselves distracted, keep themselves, watching Sports Center or on the bottle, or working harder, longer, making more money, getting more things. And all these different elements are these attributes of not wanting or thinking they can be exposed, because on some level, I believe, on some level, they think that if I admit I have a problem or if I'm struggling, that this makes me less of a man, that this makes me less of, this alpha species. And the truth is, none of us are perfect. None of us will ever be perfect. And as much as you see some of these guys who are your aspirational X, Y, or Z, they all have issues. They're just on a different level than yours. And some of their issues, they feel weightier than you feel yours. And it's not a matter of like one has one weight and one has another. It's just the fact that we all have weight. And what if you could give yourself grace and love and self-compassion? Because if you could give that to yourself, you can easily make that contagious to others.
It's interesting. I recently had an acquaintance of mine commit suicide, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And this individual lived in the UK, and it came to my attention that he decided to take his own life. And there was a whole host of reasons that were apparent. In fact, what he did was, unfortunately, is he posted the suicide letter on his Facebook page. And it was very long. It was probably the longest Facebook post. I didn't even know Facebook allowed so many words. I mean, this thing was probably every bit of 3,000 or 4,000 words. It took quite some time to read it. And I read through it, and it was very deliberate in how he crafted this post. And he called out several people: his ex-wife, his daughters, his parents, siblings, friends by name, and like what they meant to him. And he went on and on and on. And it was absolutely terrifying. And unfortunately, this individual was losing his marriage, and he was losing his job. And, it was really horrific to see that. And what was really horrific was, on the post, his daughters were begging him to not do what he was going to do. And that was like very disturbing to see that. And so, I've got a good friend of mine who has a PhD in counseling, and he's a psychologist, and he's also certified in suicide prevention. And so I just really picked his brain. I'm like, what happened here? Like, what happens to people that they decide to do this? And he said, the main culprit with all of this is this peeling away of your identity. Mm-hmm. He's like, so if you read, like his post, he talked about how he was losing his marriage, and part of his identity was, well, I'm so-and-so's husband. The other thing he was losing too was his daughters. Because I think the break between him and his wife was very bitter, and he was trying to make contact, and she wouldn't connect with him. And his daughters, I don't think, were really connecting with him either. So he was like, desperately trying to connect with them because he wants to see his daughters and wants to see it. And I don't think the marriage had dissolved yet. It was in the process. Well, then he found out he was losing his job on top of it. Mm. So this friend of mine who's a PhD, he's also in our group. He said, there's this peeling away of identity. And if you really look at this young man's identity, he was so-and-so's husband, he was so-and-so's dad, and he did this thing for a living. And when all that's taken away, that is the culprit of your identity, and who you identify yourself with is stripped away from you. And therefore you don't feel like you have purpose. You don't have identity. You're completely lost. And I'm wondering, for you, was underneath the Christmas tree that year, was that your similar experience?
I would say 100%. And that's also why I do all the work that I do. Underneath everything that we do in our coaching is about identity. It's the core of how we show up in the world, is how we perceive ourselves, every one of us. And as males, that silence that we keep oftentimes is a deathly type of silence, because that identity we put on our performance in so many areas. And as we grow up, everything we're doing is based on performance. In childhood, it's, it starts off with, if you raise your hand to answer the questions, good job, Johnny, good job. You make that team, good job, Johnny, good job. you hit that home run. Good job, Johnny. Like everything is based on your performance. And when you fail or when you make a mistake, then on some level it starts to chip away. It's like, oh, you struck out, Johnny. And there's this constant need for performance. And if you get on the performance train, which most people do, is now I got to go to a school, I got to get good grades, I got to get that job, I got to get that corner office, I got to make that money, I got to get that house, I got to get that 2.5 kids, I got to get that picket fence. And we start going down this whole trail, a hamster wheel of performance. And each one we attach to our identity. Oh, who are you? I'm the guy that works for IBM. Oh, you work for IBM? Yeah, I'm a senior vice president. Cool, great, congratulations. And we hang something upon that title, upon that role. Oh, I make over 6 digits, man. I've made it. It's some kind of identity. I'm married to this beautiful woman. I've achieved. I've got X amount of kids. I've achieved. And everything becomes upon this performance, and our identity is always tied to our performance. We've created an entire society based on that. So when that stuff gets peeled back, I lose my marriage, I lose my kids, or I lose my job, I lose that income, I lose that house. Then who am I? And that's the BS. Is we think all of that external stuff is going to make up for an internal need. And yet the internal need is something you can control in and of yourself. You can paint your identity.
Yeah, how do we do that?
When we look at who we are, you go and you shake somebody's hand, you're at a party, a cocktail party, a business party, a Christmas party. The first question people ask is, what do you do?
What do you do?
Right? And all of a sudden there's your identity. Now out from your mouth comes, I do this, 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 and this. Versus something like, what do you love? Why don't we ask that? Hey, Larry, great to meet you. So tell me, what do you love? Well, I love working out. I love sports. I love my boys. I love it. Cool. Like, what if that was more your focus and nothing can take away your love? Nothing can take away your appreciation. Nothing can take away the things that you enjoy. It's an expression of who you are. And no matter where you are on the face of the planet, it still resides. Like, we have to reframe our stories. The second piece is, what if everything you've done, everything you've experienced, all the things that you know are nothing more than the tuition to be who you are today? You've never failed. You've never made a mistake. You've never missed your opportunity. You just went through an experience and it gave you wisdom, insights, and knowledge for your future. Now you're smarter, brighter, better than you ever were because you went through those experiences. And so here today is a day that you can make your own. Like, I have this story. And the things you went through no longer define you, but rather refine you. They made you. They created you. And now your identity isn't based on accomplishment. Your identity is based on who you've become, who you are as a result of it. Now I'm a guy who has resilience. Now I'm a guy who's screwed up and messed up sometimes in his life. I'm a guy who knows what it's like to feel, knows what it's like to experience trial and tribulation. And I'm resilient. And I've been through stuff. I've got the scars to prove it. And I'm damn proud of myself because I've persevered. Like, what if all that you are is what you've always done, always been, not from a performance basis, but just because it's your story? And secondarily, what if you fell in love with your story? I hate that I went through what I went through. The amount of people I hurt, my ex-wife and what I put her through. I hate the people that I used for my own selfishness. I hate that part of my story. But I don't carry shame about it anymore because I don't know that guy anymore. It's not my identity. It's who I was in that season, doing the best I could with what I had. And I've gotten a lot better and a lot smarter since.
You know, these aren't the normal conversations though we have at the cocktail party, right?
Not at all.
Or where we get together. It's like, well, what do you love to do
Yeah.
versus what do you do? And I mean, quite frankly, I mean, I'll be honest, man. I'm sure you're probably in the same boat. I find myself bored with just everyday mundane conversation. Like I want depth, almost
Yeah.
right away. And I know that throws people off. But here's what I've also noticed about it. While it throws people off, people actually really get intrigued and they like talking about those things. So if I ask somebody, and I'll usually start a conversation like that, like, what do you do? And they'll be like, same thing, I'm a senior vice president over at IBM. What do you love about your job most? And then that question usually, like, I'll get like this kind of head cock, like, huh?
Yeah.
Like they're not really used to
Mm-hmm.
for questions like that. But I also see them like, oh wow, that's a good question, and then they'll be like, and then you'll see them kind of come to life. Wow, I really like doing this, and their voice tone changes, and this type of thing changes. And I'm like, well, tell me about your family. How many kids you have? And then if I ask them, tell me about your family, or
Mm-hmm.
basically make that statement, it's a lot different than do you have kids, right? Because then the answer usually is like, yeah, I've got 2 girls and a boy.
Mm-hmm.
But if I say, tell me about your family, like I can literally just sit back and this person, man or woman, doesn't really matter, will open up and tell me all about each one of their kids, what they do, what grade they're in, what sports they're in, all these different things, which is quite fascinating. But, I think that there is a tremendous amount of identity in the car we drive and in the home that we live in our accomplishments and the number in our bank account and all of these things that I guess give us maybe some type of, I don't know what, security or I don't know what it is, but why is it, do you think that most people just default to those things as who they are versus those are parts of their life, but it's not who they are?
It's easier.
Mhm.
It's easier to measure your life by the external. You don't have to work at it. You work at getting the accolades, but you have to work at like being fulfilled in yourself. You have to do that work of internal reflection, that sense of ownership, that sense of humility, that sense of self-awareness. Like nobody really teaches you that kind of emotional intelligence. I moved to Europe, a year and a half ago, and it's really curious how they put far less emphasis on external things than we do back in the States.
Really? Like what do
So
you mean? So are the conversations just totally different over there?
not totally different, but I'll give you an example. Like, for instance, they're not so concerned about their dress or attire being flashy and sticking out from everybody else. You'll see some of that, kids who want to dress like rap stars or whatever like that. But I mean, generally speaking, just, it's going to be the same dark gray or blue, dark blue suit. Nobody's really trying to be super flash or whatever. The buildings are older than our country in the United States. Some of these things, they're built in the 1300s, 1400s, 1600s, whatever. And on the outside, they look decrepit. And then you walk in the doors and you're like, good God, what have I walked into? This place is spectacular. Whether that's the architecture, the design, or, the whatever, it's just got a flair about it in and of itself with its own ancient qualities and its beauty and its history and its story. People here who have something like crooked teeth don't come to you like covering their mouth and not smiling. They just are accepted just as they are. They're not trying to put some kind of flash thing. And that's an overgeneralization, but I use an example like, what if maybe our westernized society has also fueled this with our media and the way that we do movies and music and everything else? Because here I am, halfway across the globe, and certain songs can come on, and even though they speak a different language, they're singing in English with those songs. You're finding that music teaching them English. All their movies, most of them are in English. My kids go out on the playground and kids are cussing like sailors Portuguese kids are cussing like sailors and saying the N-word over and over. And my kids are appalled and said, we don't talk like that. You don't say that in America. What in this and that? Like, no, that's not appropriate. And that's just what they think of Americans because that's all the media they see. But all of this is just this facade. And they think that that's what they have to do or to be to fit in. What if, as adults, nothing's really changed since high school? What if you're still trying to be in the cool kid club? What if you're still trying to wear all the right clothes and you're trying to get in all the right clubs and you're trying to get into all the right positions and get picked for the right team? And it never changes. And then your self-worth is always connected to someone else choosing you. It's ridiculous. But that's the society we've created.
My wife and I have become really big fans of Ted Lasso. And Roy Kent is by far my most favorite character. And he drops the F-bomb like every single chance he gets, even with his little niece, who's like in third grade or something like that. But it's really fascinating. Yeah, just the cultural differences. And I know you're over in Portugal now. You moved from Nashville to Portugal. What do you think is the gap between someone who's so used to that, right? And I'm talking someone meaning like, I think most people here, especially in the States, would agree that, hey, they won't, I don't think they'll really say this stuff out loud, but that is our measuring stick for success and how much my worth and, like my identity and all these things. But what do you think is bridging the gap between like, hey, these things really aren't your identity? In fact, it's the experiences that are the tuition for who you are today. It's who you are, not all these different what's. What's the gap that we're missing, do you think, between all the things we measure things by and who we are?
There's so much psychology behind all that. Well, suffice to say this as an example. The average salary of a Portuguese local is around 1,200 euros. And that's good. That's if we're doing good. But a lot of them make around 700, 800 euros. So the equivalent of that would be about 900 bucks up to about 1,500 bucks per month. And you're going to raise a family on that in Lisbon, where rents, for a 2-bedroom apartment might be 1,500 euro to 1,900 euro. They have to live on the outskirts. It's gentrification, just like every other big city, in the world. And even though they may be frustrated with some of the existence of, not being able to have this place or live in this city or blah, 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 man, they have a life. They watch the sun go down on the hills in what they have called miraduros, where everybody gathers and has a beer or a glass of wine and watches the sun go down, and they talk and they engage. And there's so much friendship and so much joy. In the warm weather, they all go to the beach. They just hang out and they laugh and play games and play in the cold water, go surfing. There's something about having joy outside of materialism, outside of title, outside of access. I went to Haiti back in 2006 with my wife. My wife is half Haitian. My father-in-law used to be the president of the American diaspora. And so we went to Haiti to experience it and see it and to witness so much joy, even amongst corruption, bureaucracy, poverty. And we saw people who are happy. And they don't have all the nice things. They don't drive the nice cars. They don't have the nice houses that we perceive. But they have joy. There's a massive disconnection in our westernized society amongst contentment and joy, self-satisfaction, not based on these external things. We don't know how to do that. So many are upset, sad, and depressed because they don't have what the Joneses have or what that guy got. And they don't know how to celebrate their friends or family having success. All they know is spite and envy, jealousy. That's ridiculous. Our human quotient should have evolved a lot more than that. And yet we put so much value on the money, on the position, on the power. What if we didn't? What if we put our value on who we are, how we show up in the world, our own meaning, our own contribution?
I think
How
that's
much
one of the biggest
joy.
gaps. Sorry, you weren't done. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and how much joy we bring to the world. That's it.
I think that's one of the biggest gaps, though, is that people don't know who that person is. I think for the most part, I don't think that to be quite honest, do you know who Dr. John Deloney is by chance?
Mm-mm.
Do you follow him on? Okay, so Dr. John Deloney, I love his work and love what he does, and he's on the Dave Ramsey team. So,
Mm.
but he's brilliant at relationships and psychology. I mean, that's what he has a doctorate in. But he talks about this, and I follow him on social where he talks about this epidemic of busyness, where people have to remain busy so they don't have to actually sit there in their thoughts, which I thought was really, really fascinating. And to be honest, I've gone through seasons like that where I just want to be busy and get the next thing done, because sitting there sometimes with my own thoughts, depending on what season I'm in, if I'm in a season of challenge or if I'm in a season of whatever, it's sometimes difficult to be like, well, I don't want to think about that. So I'm just going to go do this, or I'm going to go do that, or I'm going to go work on this next project, or I'm going to, or the best, right, is just scrolling on social media. So you just don't have to think. But he talks about, if you are an individual who can't sit still and you have to constantly be doing something, constantly working on something, or you're numbing yourself out on Netflix or scrolling through social or getting on TikTok or whatever, because the absolute experience of you sitting there for even 5 minutes with your own thoughts and having a quiet conversation with yourself makes you uncomfortable. You've got to get very comfortable with that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that you just described so many, and even, how we started this conversation is being that place where it's pursuit for more. And if I don't pursue, what if somebody else gets it and I don't? There's this underlying competitiveness, quotient that keeps us in pursuit. And then number two is, to your point, about the numbing or the coping elements. Like, as long as I can keep focus on doing that thing out there, I don't have to focus on what's going on in here. I don't have to focus on my own lack of self-satisfaction, my own sense of self-awareness, my own emotional intelligence. And I stay, and this is really, if we're going to get really deep, we like to be a victim sometimes. Most Americans have taken a victim mentality in the context of everything outside has to give me permission for something. Like, I get picked for the job, like I said before, getting picked for the team. We equate that. I get picked for this payroll. I get picked for this thing. And then if somebody somewhere isn't helping me in some form, then I get angry that, what about me? And I'll spend more time feeling sorry for myself, being a victim, than I will actually feeding my soul to make me a victor. Doing the work, putting in the personal development, being intentional, showing up for yourself, looking in the mirror and saying, you good looking mother, don't you ever die. Come on. Like, we don't put the value into valuing ourselves. And what if we did? What if instead of like putting all the pursuit on the things external and dependent on everyone else, we created our own destiny, created our own future because we saw ourselves as that powerful? What if you woke up in the morning and said, today I'm going to create, I'm going to bring meaning and contribution into the world, and this is the decision I'm going to make today. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I'm just deciding to do it. And if you did that day after day after day, guess what? You'd actually start doing something that brought meaning and contribution to the world. But most of us would want to be living by default because it's easier and we can cope and we can numb and we don't have to show any kind of energy or forward progress in how we manage the inertia inside of us. I don't believe that's what we were created for. And I believe that's why so many people get sad, angry, upset, selfish, narcissistic. Is because they don't know how to feed their soul. Nobody teaches us how to do that, how to nourish the mindfulness, all the things that people think are woo in the spirituality and meditation and mindfulness, tapping, yoga, whatever. But the moment you start investing in yourself is the moment everything changes. Because as you grow and become more fruitful, others can eat of your fruit. And that becomes the seed that transforms their life too. And it becomes this thing that starts to grow and to multiply. And we have to be able to move through our own resistance. Like sometimes it's going to be hard. Sometimes I'm going to have to face my crap. Sometimes I'm going to own something that might sting a little, but that's okay. It no longer defines me. And then we push into the next level of where we start growing and we start changing our mindsets and we start liberating ourselves out of scarcity and shifting ourselves into abundance. Start moving ourselves from jealousy and anger and envy and into overflow, source and supply and celebration of those around us. And then we shift that into being a light and to being great and to be marvelous and to be wonderful and not be ashamed of it. And not feel like somebody's going to put me down because I'm showing off my light. Nobody's going to put a bushel over me. I'm just going to be me. And I'm going to make this contagious where my joy, my love, my peace, that sense of self now gives others permission to do the same. This is what the world is missing. And for your friend, my heart goes out to you. My heart goes out to that family of this guy in the UK that took his life because he didn't have anyone who could tell him how awesome he really is. And that everything's going to be okay. And what you're experiencing today does not dictate what is possible for you tomorrow. I lost my marriage. I lost my business. I lost my house. I lost every freaking thing. And it didn't kill me. I went and built another business later that went sideways. I lost a ton of money. We had to sell our dream house to get out of debt. Guess what? I had the resilience because I had been through some stuff worse before. And even though it sucked, and even though I had to like suck up my pride and tell my wife, this is what's going to have to happen. We made a plan. And I was like, but this is not the end. We're going to rebuild. And we did. 2 years later, we were in a better house with a swimming pool and hot tub and all like, how do we get, and not that made it didn't even dictate who I was. It just became a matter of fact. This is just how I show up in the world. These are the kinds of things I create. And then in the middle of the pandemic, we're like, what are we doing in America? We want to go give our kids an international experience. So we decided to create a new idea, a new dream. And in December, my wife says, you know what? Let's go. Where are we going? I don't know yet. Let's figure it out. And then we started doing the research, and we had never been to Portugal. We didn't know anything about Portugal, but it just kept coming in the radar because we chose to create. The universe met us and said, here's something that will meet the things you want to create. What do you want to create? You sitting in your car, you washing your dishes, you mowing the lawn, you who are listening to this right now, what do you want to create? You are so powerful. You just need to give yourself permission to be this person you know you were capable of. Be this beauty and this greatness and this glory. And once you give yourself permission, you have possibility. We need more people like that, Larry.
I agree. I agree. I mean, can you imagine if you were raised that type of mentality, that type
Mhm.
of a force for positivity and influence and inspiration?
Come on.
It's really, I don't know, man. It's really unreal. I'll share this with you. I've worked with you, so you know me inside and out. And I have a tendency to be my own hero, and I have a tendency to be my own villain, without a doubt, without a doubt. And there are times where, when things are going really, really well, like I carry the hell out of that momentum. And then there are times also in my life where I've carried the opposite momentum, and it's like it takes so much more force and strength to get things going in the other direction sometimes.
Mhm.
You know, I like to think that I've got a great connection with my kids, and I do. I really do. But here's the interesting thing. You and I were supposed to do this podcast months ago, and I was hit with I started writing a book, and I wrote this book in 8 weeks. And the book is coming out in June. And as soon as I started writing this book, I was just swarmed with challenges. It was just over and over and over. And it was, some of them were professional. I mean, everything in our business within Data Edge is great. It's healthy and all that, but there were some seasons of challenge in there that really snagged us a little bit. We had a little bit of drama on our team. Like we had an individual leave our team, which was a blessing in disguise. We had I injured my knee, and my knee was bleeding internally for 10 weeks, and they couldn't figure it out until they got in there, and they had to clean it out. But like I literally couldn't do 75% of the stuff that I used to be able to do. I mean, I just went and played basketball with my kids for the first time in almost 5 months, and I really wasn't
Mhm.
playing. I was kind of like walking fast, but I can't jump or run yet.
Yeah.
And I have a tendency of, when all these challenges are facing me, that I focus on the challenge, because my mentality is like, okay, I've got this challenge, and I'm going to get through them. And here's how I'm going to do it. So it's challenge, challenge, challenge. But it's not the most inspiring thing to do. But we go through those seasons where we feel like we're fighting, we're in battle, and then we go through seasons where we feel like, oh man, it's like everything I touch turns to gold and I'm winning. But in this season where you feel like things are a battle, I had this conversation with my 17-year-old son, and we talk every night. His two favorite words are "let's talk," and he's almost 18, which it blows my mind that he loves to talk. And he's
Mhm.
18-year-old kid almost.
Yeah.
And he told me the other night, he goes, "You are the best, Dad. Like, you're the best." And I'm like, I kind of like laughed. I'm like, I was like, "Thanks, man. You give me way too much credit, man." I was like, why do you say that?" And he goes, and I'm sitting here thinking about like all the things that I have not been able to do with him lately. Like we used to practice wrestling together because he's a wrestler. So I used to wrestle with him and help him like before like his tournaments and stuff like that. I haven't been able to do that. We used to go out and run together. We used to go out and hit the weights together, and all these things that we used to do. And I mean, I'm getting back to it now, but man, it's been a slow process. And I looked at him and I was like, why would you say that? Because in my mind, I measured myself with all these things of being influential and inspiring and positive force for his life through all the things I just mentioned, and not the other stuff.
Yeah.
And I go, why would you say that? I was like, I got to admit, man, like, I feel like I'm a fraction of who I used to be for you. And he's like, that's not true. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, you talk to me every night. He goes, do you realize like the amount of guidance that you give me just through conversations? Like, I'm able to navigate, so many bad things that, I know a lot of my acquaintances are into, and some of my friends. And I don't decide to do those things because I always reflect upon the conversations that we have together. And even like how you've helped me through school, and you've helped me navigate. He started a business too. He's like, you've helped me in business. You've helped me. He's like, you're always, always there. You were like the steady rock in my life, no matter what's going on in your life or how you view it.
Yeah.
That's how I view you. And I was like, wow. I was like, that's really fascinating, because haven't viewed myself like that for you in quite a few months since I got hurt, because I felt like I couldn't really show up for you in the way that I could have. He's like, that's not true. But there was something that emerged out of that conversation that I think it was really, really telling. And I think most men and most people just fall into this trap is, what if you could view yourself through the eyes of your child, right? And what would that look like? Or like my wife, like, what if we've got a great relationship? What if I viewed myself through her lens and not my own critical lens? What would that look like? And the funny thing is, I'll be really honest, Angus, I don't ever ask myself to do that. I don't even stop and think that way. Yeah. And I'm curious, like, of maybe would I see things differently, if that makes sense.
What a powerful question when you have safety enough in your family where you could say, hey, can we just pause for a second? How am I doing? Is there anything I could be doing better? We talked about before we got on here that list my wife, created when we were first dating, the 5 loved, 5 unloved. A little exercise that we did. What if you did that exercise with your kids or with your wife? And basically it's this, is like, what are the 5 things that I do that make you feel loved? Or what are the 5 things I do that make you feel unloved? And now it's no longer like a thing to, make them happy because they're, particular or something, but it's rather like, what do you need from me? Like, what if you knew the things that you did that actually make them feel loved, and stop measuring them by what you think? Your standard is not their standard. What if you actually ask them, hey, what could I do to make you feel more loved? What is, so and again, with a healthy relationship, right?
Yeah. And, working with you for the 3 months that I worked with you as you were my coach, I went through that process with my wife. And I got to tell you, it was a very telling, incredible experience, because the things that she shared, some of them, like, I've known her forever, but some of them, they're on my radar because she tells them to me, but it's not the things that I would think at the top of my mind. Right. So, like, for instance, she's like, when you just do something like out of the blue. So like last week, my wife has had to do a lot of like heavy lifting because I haven't been able to do a lot, like with
literally.
and yeah, like literally, like I've haven't been able to do like a ton like I used to. Like I used to like walk our dog every day, and like take the dog out all the time, and like even like we've got this giant like water jug with these 5-gallon glass bottles that are 50 pounds, and for a while there I couldn't lift those up. Like my kids had to do it, and my wife has also had to do, like, my wife has never done my laundry, and because I couldn't go up and down the stairs, like she was doing my laundry. I'm like, you really don't have to do my laundry. Like, I'll get on my rear end, I'll just bring the basket down for me, I'll get on my rear end, I'll slide down, I can go up 1 foot at a time. She's like, Larry, I can do your laundry. It's 1 load a week. Like, you wear the same crap like all the time. Yeah. I throw it in just like you do. There's no colors, no gentle cycle. Everything goes in one thing. I can do that. And I'm like, okay, it's kind of funny, but so I came home the other day and I picked her up a massage just out of the blue. And she looked at me and she's like, oh my God. She goes, you did not have to do this. I was like, you've done like so much lately. But for her, like, that's a major needle mover. And she like hugged me and kissed me. And she's like, thank you so much for this. And I was like, why is it so meaningful for you? She's like, it's so meaningful for me because she's like, I'm not going to go do this for myself. She's like, but when you do it for me, it gives me permission. But then it's also like, you see me and you appreciate me and you want to give me a break because you know that I've been doing a lot. And I was like, yeah, that's true. She's like, man, that's like, when you think of me like that, it literally makes me feel so loved. And to me, it was just like, well, I'm just getting her a massage. Like, I'm in the area, I know where she likes to go, and I'm going to get her this thing. But for her, it was like the skies opened up, man.
And it was just the discovery of having that conversation with the 5 loved and 5 unloved. In that same way, how we started the conversation is like, we think that I have to do these different performance for your son to be happy, or for your son to think that you're a good dad, or we have to do these certain things to have our boss think we're doing a good job, whatever. And rarely do we just ask, hey, what can I do to help move the needle? What can I do to help the team? And be proactive or curious to just explore, to learn, or to care. And like you said, in that moment, suddenly that person feels seen. You know how many leaders would love somebody on their team to say, hey, can I help? How can I help you be more successful? How can I help this team be easier for you to handle? What can I take off your shoulders? Like, most people
Means the
don't
world.
care. They don't think about that. And yet if you did, it would mean the world. If you
It
did,
would.
what a difference it could make. And you have to come from that place of abundance, that place of serving, that place of overflow, because you're not like just doing the bare minimum. You're actually stepping out to like bring your gift to the world.
Can we talk about your experience with your wife? Because I think it's very telling for several different reasons. I'm talking
Yeah.
about the 5 loves and the 5 unloves.
Yeah.
So you told me, you shared with me that you and your wife went through this process quite some time ago.
Yeah.
And she shared something with you that you were like, wow, I really didn't expect for you to say that. But in her culture, she viewed a certain, I guess, trait of yours as kind of offensive and disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the reason why I'm asking you this question.
Yeah.
You went through that process with her, and it wasn't even on your radar that it could have been something that was detrimental to your relationship. Now, you and I see this as coaches. We see this all the time, right? And it's emotional resentment. It's things that are said or not said, things that are done or not done, and that person takes note of it, and they never really say it out loud, but yet
Yeah.
it creates like this huge divide in the relationship. And for
Yeah.
her, so I think that this is really important to bring to the surface for marriages, for relationships, of like, hey, whatever is going on the isn't really on your radar, but it's on somebody else's radar, and it's very apparent to them. They haven't told you about it because they haven't had the opportunity, like what this exercise does.
Yeah.
But but I think that it creates emotional resentment, which I think if emotional resentment left unchecked is like a cancer in a relationship that metastasizes and will eat away at the relationship. And I think even in your situation, maybe that left unchecked for quite some time might have really put a wedge between you guys. But I'd love for you to share that experience.
For sure. And, it's like so let me back up. When we first started dating, it was 2005. We started dating, and then we had gone through a bunch of stuff. She'd been married, I've been married. I like to call them the practice marriages, and we're trying to figure our stuff out. And we had gone to counseling even before we were like talking about getting married. We just there was a friend of ours and was like, hey, help us walk through some of the stuff. And in amongst that, my wife came up to me, and she had developed this little thing, and she's super smart. She's way smarter than me. And she's like, hey, I thought of this thing. Let's do this list where you write your 5 things that make you feel loved and your 5 things that make you feel unloved. And I'm going to do the same. Then we'll come back and talk. And that was the gist. And one of the things that she wrote down, and this is what you're asking of me, was she said, what makes me feel unloved is when you're sarcastic. I was like, what? What do you mean when I'm sarcastic with you? She's like, your sarcasm, it's passive aggressive anger. Like, no, it's not. And no, it's not. And it's not. It's just my language. It's my way. It's my style. I'm from Wisconsin. We're in the Midwest. This is what we do. This is our way of communication. My family's always done it. We've always done this. And I was trying to make light of it, and she didn't crack a smile. I was like, shit. Uh-oh. And tell me more. I'm so sorry. Tell me more. She's like, when you're sarcastic, and she went on to explain, you're not saying what you're actually saying, and yet you are. And you won't just use your words to say what you want to say. And to me, that's lazy and offensive. I was like, ooh, ouch. My family's been doing this my entire life. Maybe this isn't my way. And it was the first time that my mind connected to, I'm not doing something because somebody's telling me what I have to or don't have to do. She's not saying, stop this or do this. What she's saying is, when you do this, it makes me feel unloved. That's a completely different motivation. I don't feel controlled. I don't feel manipulated. In that moment, I'm like, well, I care for you. I don't want you to feel unloved. And it took me probably two strong years to really wean myself from being sarcastic, to the point where I'd start to say something, then I'd stop midstream. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I was going to be sarcastic. My bad. My bad. We kind of made a funny out of it. And then it got to the point where my thought was to be sarcastic, and I stopped it in my head before it ever came out of my mouth. And that's when I got really good at it. It was terrible when I go to my family, like holidays, because they'd start bringing out the zingers and I'd want to strike back, and I just didn't. And I had trained myself to wean myself from the sarcasm because I wanted my wife to feel safe. I wanted my wife to feel loved. And vice versa. We've done that list. Our first 5 or 6 years of our marriage, every anniversary, we would do that list. And it's so funny that you asked me about that, because we just did it again on 2.5 weeks ago, on the 1st of this month. It's now December. And we sat down after we have gone through this really, really hard season of selling our house and selling all of our things and declaring that Portugal was our future. The stress of flying home and doing all of that within 2 weeks, just pop, 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 pop. And we came back exhausted and angry and at each other's throats in the middle of it. And it wasn't personal, it was just the stress. And we decided to have our 5 love and unloved to recenter ourselves.
What came out of that?
Well, I'm sitting here looking at her list right here in front of me. One of the things that she said that makes her feel loved is when I do something to surprise her. And I happened to have planned a trip where I rented a car and we drove up to Nazare to see the 100-foot waves. It was only 45 that day, 45-foot waves. But
only 45.
Only 45-foot waves. Yeah. It's an amazing place. It's gorgeous. It's awe-inspiring. And we spent the night. And I organized the Airbnb. I organized, where we're going to go, when we're doing. Normally, she's a former travel blogger. She always organized all of our trips. And the fact that I did that made her feel loved. And it was a surprise. And I handled it, which is one of her other things, is like, when I just take something over, when I strategize the plan and I make it happen, it's like one thing that she doesn't have to wrap her brain around, because she's managing so much for our kids and so much for the house. And suddenly I did something she didn't have to. And one of the things I didn't know is I make her coffee in the morning or take her some toast and in bed. Here, my workday doesn't get started till like noon or 1 o'clock, and we'll get started in the morning, and I've got nothing to do, and I'll make coffee around 9 o'clock after I took the dinner. I've been up for an hour and a half, 2 hours, like I got nothing to do. And I start making coffee. I've already walked the dogs, and I'll take her a cup of coffee. I didn't know that every time I do that, when she smiled, it was really genuine, that she felt seen, she felt cared for. And those are like the little things, but there's the other pieces where she feels unloved. Like, she asked me something and I'm in the middle of a thought in one direction and I can't move my attention to her in that moment. And I keep saying, just give me 2 more minutes. Give me 2 more minutes. Like, the more I delay, the more she feels unloved, that I won't prioritize that interaction and that conversation. And I'll keep my head focused on whatever I thought I was, versus putting a pin in it and giving my attention to her. And I'm not perfect, I'm working on that. That's a big one for me.
Do you think that most couples, like I'm sitting here thinking like, man, if most couples did this on at least an annual basis, I mean, think of the roadmap, the breadcrumbs that leaves behind for you to just, so this is it. So I can just go do these things, and they mean the world to her, right? Or him, if it's about him, right?
Yeah.
And then the same is true for like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that this was causing damage, and I can easily
Yeah.
stop doing that whatever that thing is. It's,
Yeah.
it's interesting. We do, in corporate America, you have annual reviews where all these things emerge to the surface. Here are the things you've done well, and here's the opportunities for improvement.
Yeah.
But very rarely do we do that in our most important relationships, to where like, hey, here's the things that are fantastic, and here are the opportunities. And if more couples did those things, I would think that, number one, you could probably prevent a whole lot of emotional resentment from happening in the first place. And you could double down on what's really, really working and make that other person feel really loved. And the relationship then just elevates and flourishes more.
Well, that's why I told you, dude, this will be the next book. Is I wholeheartedly believe all my clients that I've had them do this, the significance of it in their lives and what they've learned has been fantastic, amazing, and deep. And it's amazing when a couple feels loved, they feel like they're on the same team. The level of intimacy, the level of transparency, the level of communication goes deeper. It becomes closer, and they have more sex. Woo-hoo! Like, this is,
got everybody's attention.
it's and here's the beauty is it's not about performance. It's like you're not doing a thing to get a thing. You're doing a thing because you love someone. You're doing a thing to provide an environment. You're actually coming from a place of an expression of who you are. You're not doing something to prove you are something, to validate you are something, to achieve at something. You're doing it because it's just who you are.
Which, and by the way, your significant other can sniff that a mile away. Which one are you doing and why? Right? You don't have to say it; they know.
Yeah. When I don't give my wife my full attention, that's probably one of the most offensive things I can do to her. Having my phone in my hand while I'm talking to her, even if I'm not looking at the phone, is just not cool. And dang it, man, we are so addicted to our phones. You and I have talked about this before, is learning how to just take that phone at the end of the day and put it someplace I can't get to it. I have a little cradle next to my bed in my bedroom. And at the end of the day, I walk out of this office, I go and I put my phone there and I don't touch it for 3 hours. That's so hard. When I first started doing that, so hard.
Very hard. But at the same time, like, do you ever feel, so we have this device here called the RO, which is like this box where your phone charges, and then there's an app, and it measures the time you're completely and totally physically away from your phone. Like, it actually measures that, and kind of like, it's this nice little dopamine hit, you're like, oh, sweet. Like I logged, 12 and a half hours of RO time, which is time away from your phone. But the level of stress considerably goes down. And I think unless you really experience like time away from your phone, like it's not even in your pocket, it's not on the countertop, it's not even in sight. Like your level of, I think, anxiety of like, oh, this and that, and I got to keep up with this and reply to that, or somebody needs this or whatever, it just diminishes that feeling of anxiety, I think.
Yeah. I'm not there yet to where I perfected this one. I need this little tool to help me feel good about being away from my phone. It's weird. It's almost like a mistress. It's like, I want to run to my phone. What are my fantasy football score? I just want to know if I got one more point, if I got da. And we'll make up all the dumbest excuses. Maybe my client's trying to get a hold of me. Maybe da. And I've just told myself, look, my clients will respect me more when I honor my time. My fantasy football score is going to be my fantasy football score, whether or not I check it.
I agree.
Like, there's things that we have to disassociate, disconnect, decouple ourselves from the BS stories we make for ourselves.
I totally agree. And there is that credibility. I worked with this project manager. She helped my son Mason launch his children's book called Never Give Up No Matter What. And this was 5 years ago. And she was a friend of mine's wife. So like I knew her really, really well. I had never worked with her professionally, but I will never forget this night she virtually slapped my hand over text.
Mm.
And so I texted her, and it was like, I think, I don't know, like a few days before the launch of his book, and it was a big deal. And I was like, hey, Amber, blah, blah, blah. And I went over text, and she immediately texted me back. She's like, never, ever text me after 5 p.m. ever.
Mm.
This is a boundary. Do not cross it. I'm on family time. If you need something, send it to my email or send it to my team. I'll get back to you within 24 hours. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. Like, and I'm sitting here thinking, like, it actually made me respect her more. And I actually, at the time, I was like, ooh, that's kind of, it's a little rough. Like, she's pissed. Yeah. But at the same time, I was like, I really respect that. I really respect the fact that she doesn't want to be bothered. She's with, her family and doesn't want to hear from me, even though I'm a paying client. Yeah. And I definitely minded those boundaries after that, for sure. But it's
great.
I thought it was cool. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, as we wrap up here, I want to make sure that you've got all kinds of really fantastic resources, and you shared a ton with us on the podcast. But if men want to connect with you outside the show, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, go check out evolveleadership.org. That's where you can find us and hear about, what we do. And the main thing that what we do is help men take action. Well, women too, actually, but just because you asked me about the men. But we help people who are leaders of companies get out of their own way, take action to see financial growth within their companies. So we have 90% of the people that come through our program have more personal time. They achieve more satisfying work-life balance. 90% of the people that come through, they streamline their roles. They focus on vision and teams and learn how to delegate, learn how to, enjoy that work-life balance and the degree of how they lead. And most of them come out happy, a unanimous sense of happiness, heightened sense of I enjoy my life again. One thing we guarantee is that whoever comes in, they don't leave the same. Nobody.
I can attest.
Evolve leadership. Yep.
I can attest. Yeah, I loved doing so I did Angus's 3-month program. I'm a graduate, I guess you could say, quote unquote. Yeah. I really enjoyed the process. The exercises you had me do every week, and they really pulled me out of my comfort zone. But I really enjoyed it. And some of them I was just like, dang, this is hard, right? It's hard work, but it was good work. Very good, hard work. And it was what I needed for sure at the time. So appreciate it.
The stuff that sets you free. Come on.
It is.
Well, dude, it was a blast. And thanks for being a part of it and owning your shit, right? Like stepping up. It was deep. And I remember even you said one of the meetings, like some of the things that you were stepping into, you didn't even want to admit to yourself. And that's some of the most 100%. Richest, deepest soil to plant seeds in. And that's where the biggest crops come from, is when we go into those arenas and we become the warriors for ourselves. And we start fighting for who we are so we can set ourselves free.
Yeah.
Like that's the power.
I think the other thing too is you really created a really cool, safe space where I was able, as your client, let my guard down, like to where I wanted to do that, even though I didn't want to do that, if that made sense. Because I was thinking, like, if I am not like completely, like basically stripping myself of, all the stuff that I maybe cover myself with, or like whatever, then I'm not fully immersing into this experience, which that means I'm not going to get the growth out of it that I want. So like sometimes it was hard to sit, nose to nose, toes to toes with you virtually and be like, yeah, man, here's some of the shit that I'm dealing with, but that's how I grew the best. And that's how I grew the most, was facing all that crap. Yeah. But you allowing like this really fantastic space for me to do it in, which you really, really did well. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. And here's the beauty is it doesn't have to take as long as you think it will. Like you said, 3 months, right? It doesn't have to be as hard as we think it was. Yes, there's those moments of confrontation, but it's not something that's like, oh, you're going to sit on the couch and lay back and tell me about your childhood and, all your like nitty gritties. Like we don't need any of that. It's just a matter of showing up and having somebody be your guide and your mirror to activate you. Because like, I'm not the guru, I'm not the hero. Like the beauty of this, Larry, is you're the hero of your own story, and all I do is activate. All I do is shine a mirror and says, here's your shine, here's your glory. Activate it. Come alive. Be who you've always been.
Why am I thinking like Prince Adam when he raises the sword and he turns into He-Man? That's what Angus does for you. How about that?
The masters of the universe.
Oh my God, dude. Hey, as we head out of here, because I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I got to share this with you. So like my kids, my little guys, my 7 and 10-year-old, like they watch, like, dude, like I'm up to the point where I can't even stand like these cartoons in the background. I'm like, what drugs are these like cartoon creative people like even on anymore? Like, and some of them are just weird. Mm-hmm. And I always joke with the kids, I was like, you guys watch the weirdest stuff. And so then they're like, what'd you used to watch? And I'm like, you want to see? And they're like, yeah. So like, dude, I turned on the intro to He-Man, you know, and Thundercats, and my kids looked at me, they're like, you used to watch this? And I'm like,
thunder.
Snarf, snarf. And they were like, they were just like, my 10-year-old goes, Dad, this is terrible. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. Like, come on. You're watching some weird stuff, dude. Come on now. He's like, this is so bad. Look at the special effects. They're terrible. I'm like, and looking back on it when you're like 10 and you're watching that, you're like, oh, this is awesome. Now I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, wow, this is really bad.
Pretty cheesy. Yeah.
Oh, that's good awesome stuff, man. Well, gents, hey, listen up. You're not going to have to look far if you want to connect with Angus. We're going to have all the links in the show notes for leadership.org if you want to connect with him. Just head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday142 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday142. Angus, thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate the dent you're making in the world. And personally, I really appreciate my experience as one of your clients myself. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, Larry. Thanks for having me, brother.
Anytime, brother. See you soon.